We are concerned not merely with the technical problem of securing and maintaining peace, but also with the important task of education and enlightenment.
Hanging out with Grant Cameron here again. We got a new book from Grant, UFOs, Area 51, and Government Informants. Grant, I haven't had a chance to check this out. What's it about?
Yeah, well, thanks, Matt. It's an interesting book that was, this is a revision of the book. That as we go along, we find new material and we update the book. So with Desktop, because we're self-publishing, we can actually just, if we see something new, we can stick it in the book or take something out. We haven't really changed anything. There's really nothing that I would pull back from this book. There was one story we pulled out of this book, was called The South African Crash. There's a story about the South African recovering their craft. And at the time we published it, it looked like it was real. Now nobody talks about it. So we pulled that out, but other than that, none of this has really changed, and it's actually been verified by some of the stuff that people like Jacques Vallée have put out. So basically the two main things that were in this book was, one was our interaction with Dr. Eric Walker. So what happened was, as you know, I worked on the Canadian stuff, and we're always trying to figure out where did the Canadians get the material, because the Canadians were told flying saucers are real. It's the most highly classified subject in the United States. Small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush were trying to figure out what's going on. It's of tremendous significance to the Americans, and then this thing that came in my 2012 download, we were also told by Americans, 1950, that other things might be associated, such as mental phenomena.
And that was a letter that was given to the Canadian.
It was a top secret memo that was written by Wilbur Smith reporting on what he had been learned in the States. He'd gone in the United States, and he was interested in the subject, so he'd asked at a meeting. He was supposedly the head of what's called Radio Ottawa. So they were picking off Russian communications. He was he was the head radio engineer for the Department of Transport, which is now Department of Communications. So they were trying to pick off, he had control of all the radio frequencies, FM, AM, all the
and he actually got
frequencies.
funding to do research on UFOs through the Canadian government,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And so he ran the program for 4 years. And then once he detected a UFO he made a statement that he detected a flying saucer over Ottawa. They shut the program down, said he didn't discover anything. He's just doing it part-time. It was never really for real, whatever. So we were trying to figure out, where did Wilbur Smith get his material? And he was getting material out of the United States, and where to get this top secret stuff, who was telling him this stuff. And we discovered it was a guy named Dr. Robert Sarbacher who had given him a lot of the stuff, not all of the stuff. And he was like a guy who worked for the U.S. military for different agencies in terms of, like, he was a physicist, so he could be a science advisor to all these different agencies in Washington. And he put some of the stuff, but some of the stuff was still missing. And so there was a guy named Bill Steinman who in the 1980s was tracking this, and he wrote to Sarbacher, and Sarbacher wrote back to him about, where'd you learn this? And he said, well, there was this crash at somewhere in the West, and they had a meeting at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they were briefing all the scientists and the engineers as to what they discovered. And I couldn't go. This was 1950. And then, so Stanton Friedman got on the phone with them. And Steinman, they're all trying to find, like, you know, who was there? And then he said, oh, von Neumann was there, von Braun was there, Vannevar Bush was there. And then I remember Stanton saying to him on the phone, he said, so, I mean, you're naming all these dead guys. Anybody still might be alive? And he said, oh, there was this one guy from Pennsylvania. He had a company just like me. He thought he knew everything. And then Bill Steinman did the research and figured it had to be Dr. Eric Walker, who was the former president of Penn State University for 15 years. He was chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis, which is the top U.S. military think tank, where the Jasons came from, where DARPA came from, all came out of Institute for
What are
Defense.
the Jasons again?
Jasons are the top physicists in the United States. So what they would do, they learned this in World War II. So in World War II, instead of taking scientists and giving them a gun and sending them over to Europe where they could get shot or whatever, what they would say is, well, instead of doing that, you can work for, they call $1 a year men. So they would spend, they're off during the summer a lot, and they would work on inventions. So Dr. Eric Walker was the co-developer of the homing torpedo. So they would use these guys to develop stuff. So all these inventions during World War II were tapping into these top guys at Princeton and MIT and stuff like that. And instead of going to war, they would work on these inventions, and they developed radar and proximity fuse and atomic bomb and 200 different inventions. So Walker was one of those people. So he was there when it all started. And he had the Navy lab, one of those 4 big Navy labs. He had the underwater submarine lab at Penn State University, and he had 14 honorary doctorate degrees. He was friends with President Eisenhower, done an engineering study for Eisenhower. He was like this top guy, and when it was identified that he may have been the guy, Steinman phones him up, and this is in the book. So Steinman phones him up, and he says, I just want to ask you, Dr. Robert Sarbacher told me that you were one of the people that was at a briefing at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base dealing with the recovery of a flying saucer and extraterrestrial bodies. And Walker says, yeah, I was there, so what? He said, what do you mean, so what?
So he sounds like the kind of guy, if there was a crash retrieval, Eric Walker's the guy.
And they said Walker had gone to every meeting. He'd gone to every one. So then he said, what do you mean, so what? And he says, this is the most important subject ever. And then Walker says, look, you're up against the windmills. Leave it alone. Go study something else. And then he would make all his comments. So when we started these interviews, then I learned that Walker was there, and I had a friend who's the co-author there, Scott Crane, who got his journalism degree from Penn State University. So I said, well, I got this story about Walker. And he said, well, let me get involved. He said, I'll phone him up. And so he got involved, and he was a writer. So this is the first time where he sort of wrote the book, and I did all the research. And so we started this hunting of Walker. And we had all these people, and I really don't like interviewing people, so people would say, oh, I can get him to talk. I say, oh, yeah, okay, here's his phone number, here's his address. And people were contacting him from all around the world, and they're trying to get him to talk.
What year was this?
Started in 1983. He died in 1994, I think he died. And he actually came through, he was British, he came through Saskatchewan, he lived in Saskatchewan, went to Harvard, got his degree at Harvard, and was very, very prominent in the military industry. And so during this conversation, he would say stuff like he'd say, you're just curious. Tell me that's not right. You're never going to discover anything. You're basically wasting your time. All you want is this curiosity. Why should we change the rules to satisfy your curiosity?
Right, so it's a huge confirmation, even though he's saying nothing.
He's talking in rhymes and riddles.
Yeah.
And we didn't know. So when in 2012 I had this download experience, the one piece of the download experience was this 1950 memo, the top secret memo the Canadians wrote, that mental phenomena being involved. Which is interesting because the first contactees didn't appear till a couple of days after the detonation of the hydrogen bomb in 1952, in November of 1952. They detonated the atomic bomb, and suddenly Adamski's talking to these aliens in the mid-desert and saying, shut down the nuclear weapons. You've got to shut this down. And so in 1950, the Canadians were told mental phenomena. Well, how would they know mental phenomena was involved? Nobody knew aliens were telepathic yet. So they knew something in this memo. So when we were talking to Walker at one point, somebody's interviewing him, and he said, hey, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And then the guy said, I don't really know anything. Look, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in by the control group. Very few people understand how it works. So there was the confirmation of the 1950 memo, was this is what it's all about. And then Ben Rich was the third part of this thing that came into my head in 2012, when Jan Hartson goes to UCLA, and Ben Rich, the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, is talking about we got technology, take ET home, all this sort of stuff, and then he goes and he says, I had a sighting when I was a kid, I'm fascinated with this, I need to know how to get here, what's a propulsion system? And Ben Rich turns around and he goes, let me ask you a question, what do you know about ESP? And then Jan Hartson says, means everything in time and space is connected? He said, that's how it works. Walks out and gets in his car and drives away. So this is his confirmation, and so a lot of the things that Walker said, I didn't realize what he was talking about until like 2012. I go, oh, that's what he was talking about, because he was talking in these rhymes and riddles. So we pushed him a lot, and even Kit Green, famous Kit Green, I'd gone to Bill Moore, and Bill Moore everybody always said he was like a hoaxer guy. But to me, Bill Moore was just a real guy, had a big ego, and he was a smart guy. He was a top researcher at the time. And so I told him about Walker, and I know Stanton Friedman wouldn't have anything to do with it, because Stanton said, I tried to talk to him, he wouldn't talk. So it was like, he's not talking to me, he's not talking to you, it's a waste of time, what's the point? And he would be, so Bill Moore says, well, I really don't know if he is who you say. I don't think he's as powerful as who you say he is. But I got a friend, I'm going to send him there and we'll check it out. So then he said, oh, I'm sending BJ. So BJ is the Blue Jay. Blue Jay is Kit Green in the Avery. So he's sending BJ in. And then I really didn't hear anything. This is how this game played, you know. So you give them the lead and they cut you out. They get it. The story's told in Jacques Vallée's book. So Kit Green goes there. He comes in with a security clearance. And Walker worked for the CIA on a project on the Glomar Explorer. This was the Hughes ship where they recover the Russian submarine in the Pacific. They pull it up, and they say they're looking for minerals on the bottom of the ocean, and it's all this big scam. And inside the ship, these arms go down in the middle of the ship. You can't see what they're doing and stuff like that. So Walker worked on this. So did Kit Green. So Kit Green they're talking about the days of the Glomar Explorer and all this sort of stuff, and it goes on for half an hour, and everything's going great. And all of a sudden, then Kit says, well, I want to ask you about this UFO stuff. and then Walker says to him, okay, so give me 2 reasons. This is in Vallée's book. And this is confirmation, like 30 years after
Which
that.
one of Vallée's books?
Fourth one.
The fourth one.
So this confirmation where he confirms it. And they didn't tell me. I heard what had happened, but nobody told me. Because I had interactions with a lot of the Avery people back then. And so he said, as soon as he brought up the UFO subject, Walker says, okay, give me 2 reasons why I should tell you what's going on. And then Kit Green gives him 2 reasons. And then he said, apparently I gave him the wrong reasons.
And Kit Green was the guy who worked at the Weird Desk.
He ran for the CIA. He was the control officer for the remote viewing program.
Right.
So he was the CIA guy that ran the remote viewing program.
And he also has ties to the TTSA too.
Yeah, he's doing the experiment on the experiencers with the brain and all that kind of stuff. And so he's on contract. He was only with the CIA for a period of time. 83 he leaves and he appoints Ron Pandolfi. So Ron takes over his job at the CIA.
And all this is in this book. This is pretty much the gist of this book.
Yeah, we're talking about the Walker thing, the connection, to the importance of the Walker connection. And so Kit Green goes in there, and he basically, as soon as he doesn't give the 2 right answers, then Walker says, I'm not talking to you. You're not the president. I don't have to tell you anything.
Wow.
If you want, you get a letter from the president, you bring me a letter from the president, I'll check, I'll phone the president and find out whether it actually came from him. I don't have to tell you anything. He said, get out of my office.
Wow, and you talked to Kit Green a lot, right? You've talked to him quite a bit.
Never talked to him.
No?
Never talked. This is the thing, they wouldn't tell me. I would hear these stories from other people. And that's why I've always operated. I always have this joke, I stay, a couple steps removed from my victim. So I don't really talk to Ron Pandolfi, but I talk to everybody around Pandolfi and say, what's Pandolfi saying, And I just record all this stuff. And Kit Green, what's Kit Green? Like I heard the story that Kit Green had referred to Ron Pandolfi as the devil incarnate on Earth. So I picked these things, it's up, Kit Green said that, and I'd record all this stuff. So that's what I was doing here again. Like I don't do the interviews. So all these other people were interviewing Walker, and Bill Moore sent these people, but they wouldn't tell me what happened. I didn't find out until the 4th book, Vallée, came out. I heard the rumor that he'd thrown him out. That he started yelling, like he was looking at books in the corner, like the books were being tapped. The whole conversation was being tapped, and get out of my office and stuff. And so Kit Green, this head CIA guy who had clearance to talk to him, got thrown out of there. But Walker was this key guy who sort of knew, and so everything he said became very important. And Hal Puthoff even went to him. Hal Puthoff put his ideas about 0-point energy to him, and Hal says, well, and then Walker said something to the effect of, well, you'd be better off doing other things than this. This is very interesting, but you'd be better off get more doing something else. And there may be other letters. Maybe Hal talked to me more than that, but nobody's telling me what happened. And it's basically my story. We were the guys that discovered Walker and went after him. And all we did was take the thing. And Scott Crane wanted to take all the transcripts and cut them down because he said some weird things. He talked about the aliens getting up and walking away from Roswell. How do you know they all died? You're just assuming things. Everything you assume is wrong. How do you know they all died? And all this stuff. And then you're thinking, well, did they all die? I mean, did they walk away? And so he was doing this sort of rhymes. And Scott wanted to take the transcripts and just put in parts and leave out parts. I said, no, just put everything in there. Even if it makes them sound crazy, let's just record what actually happened.
How many transcripts do you have of Walker?
There's about a dozen conversations. Most of them are done by this guy. He's one of the most fascinating guys I ever met in ufology. His name was Habib Azadadel. He was Iranian intelligence. His father had been an ambassador or something to the United States from Iran. He said he had met Kennedy as a young kid, and he was like off the wall. This guy was like no rules,
Wow.
nothing. He had a phone. He actually almost got to Kissinger at one point. And what he would do all day is he'd just sit there and phone people around the world and impersonate people. And one day he's a general, and the next day he's something else. And
He got to Walker. He got to interview Walker on
a couple of times, and he said, you know, I'm a physicist from England, and he got to be on Walker's side. He said, you wrote that book. I'd like to put it in the library here, because Walker came from Nottingham, England, and that's where Azadale lived. He said, I'd like to put it in the Nottingham library, and so Walker sent him a book signed, and he put it in there. So he got good friends with him, and he started asking these questions. And Walker would say the same thing: "You're trying to get answers, aren't you?" Stuff like that. Or he would make these things about, you know, the whole thing about ESP. He asked Azadale, "What do you know about ESP?" And Azadale didn't have an answer. So we recorded all these things, and actually Azadale got into, you know, mind control. He actually wrote a real good book about mind control, about the Canadians. And interesting, I'm not sure it's in this book, but the Canadians had made this statement in November of 1950 that the mental phenomena was involved, that the Americans had told mental phenomena was involved with UFOs. So people always hear about MK Ultra, and if you look up in MK Ultra, you'll see it started in 1953. Didn't start. It started in 1951. Started in Montreal at a hotel. And it was 6 months after this memo that the Canadians had written about mental phenomena being involved. And the meeting took place, and one of the people in the memo that's mentioned here, the top secret Canadian memo, the head military guy was Dr. Oman Salant, who was the head of military research for the Canadian military, for weapons. And he was at the first MK Ultra meeting in Montreal.
Really,
so then you get this thing where the whole thing now, what are they going to do with the technology? If they figure out this mental phenomena stuff, the UFO stuff, what are they going to use it for? They're going to use it for weapons.
And how far advanced can they be if they knew all this stuff in 1950?
1950, exactly.
Oh,
that they ran this MK Ultra thing, and it started with, and Salant was in the office, in the building, and there was CIA people, and there was Canadian, American people, and UK people, because that's how it worked at the time. You'd have the atomic bomb. You had the UK working on it, Russia, or not UK, United States, and Canada, same as radar. They're all working together, and they've always had this alliance. So we did that, and the other big story, we do the whole Walker story, which is still pretty interesting, where you understand that there are people who know what's going on, and that's why he said, why should we change the rules to satisfy your curiosity? Which immediately said, hey, there's rules. This is not some free-for-all. They've got actual rules of what they're doing, and everybody's playing. So we knew that he had a file on us, because what he would do is he would go to the Institute for Defense Analysis. We actually knew it tracked what he was doing, and we'd follow, you know, and he would take one of the letters that someone had sent him, and he would make some snide comment on it. Like the guy would say, "You're an old man. Why don't you say what's going on?" And then he would sign it, "The old man." And then he would photocopy it, and then he'd send it to another researcher. So we knew he had this file because he was keeping these letters. And so what happened was, at the end, when he died in '94, I went to Penn State University, and I go through, and I'm trying to find this file. I would say, this file's got to be in there, this UFO file. And I never found it, but the amount of material this guy produced as president, it's like tens of thousands of pages, like this whole wing of archives, this massive amount of material. And then his son, Scott, contacted his son. He said, "Did you ever see a file on UFOs?" And he said, "Yeah, I found a file on UFOs." And all the stuff had been moved to the library when he left as president. He was president emeritus. So he had still had an office. Like when Kate Green went there, he had an office as president emeritus at Penn State, but he really wasn't doing anything. And he had a secretary. We talked to the secretary, and we said, "Did you see this file? There's this UFO file." And she said, because we found her because one of the letters that he'd sent out, she typed it. So we said, "You typed this letter. I mean, where's this file?" And she said, I don't know where the file is, you know, and stuff like that. And then the son said, yeah, he saw a file, and it had two crashes in it. One was in Pennsylvania, and one was on the west. So Pennsylvania would have been the Kecksburg crash, because we actually asked him. After the book came out, we still kept talking to us. Even though he got sort of exposed, and it was a big scandal in Penn State, and everybody said, "Oh, shit, Walker's involved in UFOs and stuff." And we went back, and that's when Azadale phoned, he said, "Hey, I got a question," because he had said, at one point, he had said he was only involved one time for a couple of days. And he had a pilot's license. He had a pilot's license, and he had a plane at Penn State University, And Kecksburg happened 100 miles as the crow flies. And I said to Azadale, I said, hey, I wonder if he was at Kecksburg. So he said, well, I'll phone him up, find out. So he phones him up, he says, hey, got a question for you. Now, you may not like this question, it may not be relevant or whatever, but were you at Kecksburg? And he goes, yeah, I was there. I'm not telling you anything. And he starts his game. and he basically, because there was all these stories about these guys in trench coats coming there that looked like professors or like civilian guys that were at the crash site. And he basically confirmed that he had been at Kecksburg. So he was this key figure, but the thing was, all there is the stuff that we did, and then the stuff that where people went in after, like Kate Green and stuff, but they've kept us all secret. They've not disclosed it. The other big thing we did here is when we wrote this book, first version of this book was in 1990. So we were involved in Area 51 as it happened. We were talking to George Knapp as it happened.
Oh, right, yeah.
This is long before, and so we were following, I was talking to John Lear.
Majestic 12 stuff.
Yeah, well, so John Lear was the big guy that was in the Area 51. He'd got the MJ-12 documents, and he'd gone to KLS TV in Las Vegas, and he wanted to give them the whole thing about MJ-12, and they said, we're not interested. If this was real, I would know. And then George Knapp said, hey, stop, let me take a look at this stuff. And so he starts looking at the MJ-12 documents, and John Lear had broken the stealth fighter story, that the stealth fighter had been kept at Area 51, and KLS TV won for breaking this story. But they got it through John Lear, so they had to listen to John Lear, even though he's kind of a crazy guy. And then John Lear started talking about the fact that I got this guy up at Area 51, and he's working on the craft. And then they said, yeah, okay, whatever. And then how the whole story breaks is, I believe, as I put in here, and George Knapp said, the version that's in this book is the closest he thinks to what actually happened, the way I describe it. And the way I describe it is, Bob Lazar is this crazy guy, and they actually take him on the site, and they show him all this stuff. And he's only on the site 5 or 6 times. Everybody thinks he was there all the time. He's only there 5 or 6 times. And he would start to take people out. He'd take out John Lear and Huff and all these guys to see the test, because he was pissed off because they weren't calling him to work at the site. So he said, come on, I'll show you where the test is, and he was showing the test. But how would he know when the test was? It was Wednesday night. He wasn't in the part to test. He wasn't a tester guy. He was just working in this lab. And why would they tell him? Because they wanted him to take people out and show them the test. So they were setting them up because they knew that when he came out, everybody realized he's a crazy guy. He had a pirate flag over his house. He was helping run a brothel, and the whole thing would all blow up. And everybody would say, it's all garbage. But John Lear had the story early on. He had the story that, because Lazar went up there, he said, tell him you want to go work at the site. And he tells Teller, I'd like to work up at the site. So they'd send him to the site. He gets on the site right away with no security clearance or whatever. He's on the site. And then he comes back almost the very first day, and he says to John Lear, he says, I was there, it's true. They've got it. And he said, they've got it? He says, is it theirs or is it ours? He says, it's theirs. Well, what the hell are you doing in my house? He says, they're going to be watching you, this whole place is tapped there. No, get the hell out of here. Go back to the site, work for 6 months, and then come back and tell me what's going on. And so they would go into the backyard, and they would have these meetings and stuff, and Lazar was telling them. So as long as John Lear had it, Mr. Crazy John Lear guy, everybody just said, yeah, it's John Lear. It's not John Lear.
Right.
I mean, Area 51, Area UFOs. What happened was that George Knapp had gotten involved in this whole thing. So one day he was here listening to all John Lear's crazy stories. And then in spring of 1989, so he'd been there from 1988, December of 1988, so it's like 5 months later, and then he's got this public relations show. It's on 7 o'clock Saturday morning where nobody watches it, he says. So he says, it started with a show that he had, he put John Lear on there, on this early morning show, and he said, the phone came off the hook. People are phoning, that was great, and biggest audience ever had. So then he one night, somebody doesn't show up. He does a live interview every night on the news. So the guy doesn't show up, and he says, hey, I'm missing a guest for tonight. You say you got that guy up at Area 51 that working on flying saucers? I need a guest tonight. Let's bring him on. So they put him in backlight, they call him Dennis, and now it's no longer John Lear telling the story. Now it's KLS TV. That's when it went viral, and everybody, and the Japanese were there, and everybody's with the cameras up in the hills and stuff like that, because they never realized that a major reporter would cover the story. And then it sort of got out of control, and that's when the government actually took back a whole bunch of space. Or it used to be 11 miles away, and you could actually look at the base. You could be up in the mountains. Right. And then they moved it to 25 miles. They took all this land to move people away, and they got the story back under control and probably moved all the stuff out of Area 51. And one of the rumors is they've got it on an island in the South Pacific. where you can't get to this thing. They've got all this hardware in there. Because the one story that George told, that's in this book, where he tells a story about the woman. He had 6 witnesses that came to him when he was putting the stories out, and they said, I was involved. One guy did taxes for the generals. There was just different. The one woman was a stenographer. So when they moved the material from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to Area 51 in the early 1980s, she was a stenographer, and she was taking notes as they were having these meetings about moving this stuff and all this sort of stuff. And they actually took the tape out of her typewriter and destroyed it. And so she came to him, and he said all 6 witnesses were threatened within hours after they talked to him. And he said, it really got me upset. He said, I wasn't really upset that they got threatened. He said, I was upset that they had my phone down, that they knew what was going on. And this woman basically, he said, she was so scared. They said to her, you know, you're on a security clearance. You're not allowed to talk about this. You know that. We know you have a daughter in Los Angeles. We know you go across the desert to your daughter in Los Angeles. We hate to have something happen in the desert. And George said, 20 years later, she still won't talk to me.
Wow. Yeah, he had a few witnesses like that.
Yeah, 6 witnesses.
Wow.
And they were all threatened. So this is the thing. So that was my idea of Area 51. It was, yeah, it all happened. And they set the whole thing up, and they wanted the story to leak out, but it's plausible deniability. It's always the same thing, where you give it to a bad witness who's going to tell the story, and then you know it's all going to blow up when he tells the story. And that's why they knew he was going to go to John Lear. They knew he was going to tell John Lear. That's what they wanted. They wanted John Lear telling the story, where it would sort of people wouldn't know what to believe or whatever. And they were feeding a lot of that crazy stuff in there. Even the story, I think it's in the book where I tell, where John Lear says, or you know, the Dulce Bay story, where the aliens are underground and they're told not to bring weapons in, and they're in the classroom, the Gray is in there, and the guy comes in with the weapons, and the shootout starts, and there's 66 special forces guys killed and all this sort of stuff in the underground base, whatever. Well, when it first came on there, one of the things that shows that Lazar was set up was the first day, and you've done training, I've done training. I mean, you bring somebody in for training, the first day you show them the washrooms. That's about it. I mean, you don't tell them how the program works.
Right.
First day. Second day, he's there, he's reading 125 documents, telling everything about how the program, how Looking Glass works, all this sort of stuff. And one of the documents he had was the underground base story, but it happened under Area 51. So you're defeating the same story, and they want him to go and tell the story, the underground base story, but it happened in Area 51, and all these aliens, and all these guys got killed and stuff like that. So that was my impression, was that they fed this stuff. And George actually got this book for, Bob Lazar has a copy of this book. He got a bunch for his producers and all the people worked on, because he believed that made sense to him. There's this idea that, yeah, it's all true. It all happened exactly the way Lazar said it happened. But it was basically a setup, because the key thing is that he was only on the base 5 times or 6 times. And that's why if he saw his W-2 form and only had $900, I mean, he was never on the base. They wanted to see a little bit, And when he actually got caught, the story is the morning after, him and the guys all got caught with a motorhome, where the police come and they hold him and stuff, and they realize one of the guys is missing, and that Lazar had taken him out there. Instead of going to Area 51 next day, he gets called up by Dennis, who was his supervisor, and said, come, we're not going today, we're not going to Area 51, and take him to Indian Springs. And that's where Lazar says they put the gun to his head and said, hey, when you told you this was top secret, that didn't mean to bring your friends out and watch the test. And then they said to him, we want you to listen to these tapes. And they got a tape of his first wife, and she's having an affair with her flight instructor, and she ends up committing suicide. But they play him these tapes, and then they say, well, we'll cut you a break, we'll just suspend your security clearance. Well, I mean, if you're leaking the most highly classified secret, you're in jail. They don't let you walk away. They didn't even arrest him. They didn't do anything. And then they phoned him back up later on, and they said, we'd like you to come back to the site. And he had this thing where they'd given them this stuff that tasted very bitter, and they thought they were trying to brainwash him and stuff. Yeah. And he said, no, if I go back on the site now, I may never come off. He turned them down. He was offered to come back to Area 51, and he refused to go back to Area 51. So if he's leaking the secrets, they wanted to leak more material to him. Even after the story had broken, they still wanted him to leak more material.
There's so many weird and interesting parts to all that. The Lazar story, Area 51, Majestic. And it's all in here?
It's all in there. The Majestic 12, I tell it from my version of the story when it happened, the MJ-12 document. And I basically say they were phony documents, but it's plausible deniability. They're phony documents, but the stuff is real. They're leaking real material inside phony documents because you don't know which end is up.
And it's good to understand the history of it, and to understand both sides of it too. Everything from Lazar to Area 51, you know? Even if you don't believe in it. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to reading this, Grant. Right on.
Yeah,
This is
wonderful,
pretty
yeah,
exciting.
well, thanks for your...
Is there any other main components in this book you want to talk about? Any really exciting parts of your...
That's the main stuff. We get a little bit into the Canadian stuff, how the Canadian stuff unfolds and stuff like that. But it was basically, the main book was Walker. It's exposing this Walker thing where we put the transcripts out, and it really didn't go anywhere. A lot of, you know, even at Penn State, it really didn't. There was some people who picked up on it. We thought it would be the biggest story ever. We thought it would be all over national news and stuff like this. And it's like every other story. It's like we think it's important, but then people don't really catch on the significance. But this is a high level guy. I mean, you take a look at you know, Institute for Defense Analysis. That's where the internet came from. That's where Jason's came from.
And not many other guys in ufology are focused on or interested in it. And
Yeah.
so it's really good that you've got this book and you've got it logged.
A lot of times in the UFO community, but the mistake we're making is we go from one story to another. So it's an interesting story. Okay, now who's got the next video? On to the next story. And it's like 24/7 news. That nobody ever goes back and collects the stuff, and we probably have all the answers that we need. It's all there, but everybody always thinks that the break is going to take place tomorrow.
Right. Good point.
There you go.
Right on.
Thanks.
Nice chatting with you, Grant.
Beautiful.
Looking forward to reading this, man.
Okay.